I invite you to welcome and to hear Justice Albie Sachs.
Everything was dark. I knew something terrible had happened to me. I didn't know what. If I was alive, I didn't know I was alive. If I was dead, I didn't know if I was dead. And into the obscurity, a voice came saying, "Albie, this is Eva Gorido. You're in the Maputo Central Hospital. Your arm is in a lamentable condition. You have to face the future with courage." And into the darkness I said, "What happened?" And I heard a voice, a woman's voice saying, "It was a car bomb." And I fainted back into the darkness, but with a sense of joy. That moment that every freedom fighter is waiting for. Will they come for me today? Will I be brave? Will I get through the night? They'd come. They tried to kill me. And I'd survived. And I felt triumphant. Some time passed, and I'm feeling light and buoyant. And I can't see anything, but I know I'm lying flat. My eyes are covered, and I tell myself a joke. It's a joke about Jaime Cohen, who, like me, is a Jew. He falls off a bus, he gets up and he does this, and someone said, "Jaime, I didn't know you were Catholic." "What do you mean Catholic?" "Spectacles, testicles, wallet and watch." And I started testicles, all in order. Wallet, my heart is okay. I feel my head. If there's brain damage, it can be serious. It's cut, but there are no great craters, and my hand goes down. I've only lost an arm. And again, I faint into delirious joy. And I knew then that as I got better, this was 1988, my country would get better. A few weeks later, I'm in the London hospital recovering. And that sense of elation is still powerfully with me, except at about 4 or 5 in the morning. The painkillers have worn off. The nurses aren't around. There's no one there. I feel very alone, very isolated. And I sing to myself. This is a conference of singing. It's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. It's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. It's not my brother nor my sister, but it's me, O Lord. And I go through all the different relatives one can have because I'm totally alone and I have to manage myself. Then I go back to sleep, and then an hour or two passes, and the nurses come, and everything gets jolly and bright. And the day proceeds. And in this situation, one day I get a note, "Dear Comrade Albie, we will avenge you." Signed, Bobby Naidu. And I think, Bobby, what do you mean? We're going to cut off their arms. We're going to blind them in one eye. What sort of country will we be living in? What have we been fighting for? And I say to myself, if we get democracy, if we get freedom, if we get the rule of law, that will be my soft vengeance. And later I hear that one of the persons who planted the bomb in the car had been caught in Mozambique, and I say to myself, if he's put on trial and the evidence is insufficient to prove that he's guilty and he's acquitted, that will be my soft vengeance. It's more important that the rule of law applies than that one particular rascal is put behind bars. And that theme of soft vengeance then became the theme of my life from then onwards. and saying again to myself, if we get the things we've been fighting for, then roses and lilies will grow out of my arm. The book became The Soft Vengeance of a Freedom Fighter. And one of the stories told in the book, and that's where the connection comes with this conference, is about a foundation that sponsored my getting a prosthesis. Everybody wanted me to get a prosthesis. And I also wanted to get a prosthesis. That's what you do. You lose an arm and you replace it with a prosthesis. And the arm engineer comes along and he measures me. Not me, he measures my stump. He called it my stump. And he said, your stump is a bit too long. We have to cut off a little bit more to make the prosthesis fit a bit better. I thought, I don't want to lose any more of my arm. And then he said, what color would you like your arm to be? And I thought, oh gosh, now I've got a chance. I've got one white arm, I can have one black arm, I can be a real non-racial person. In any event, he didn't cut anything else off. He gave me the prosthesis, the right length. You have straps around your back, and I'm now learning to use it. And I was so eager. I couldn't quite understand why I should pick up checkers with this clumsy arm when I had a good hand that I could do it with. But in any event, I'm trying to be a good patient. I wore that arm for 2 months. I hated it. I loyally tried to make myself look like people look who haven't lost arms. And I failed. And the occupational therapist felt she had failed. And it turns out that 90% of people with upper arm amputations don't wear prosthesis. And it came home to me. It's a purely instrumental approach to need. To make the person look like everybody else. Almost imposing an arm upon me. When I went to Roehampton and I saw a woman during my time, she was ironing, I thought, what's she doing in my space? And it turned out she was using a prosthesis. That was great. And then she told me, the only problem is when she's at home and she's not wearing the prosthesis and someone comes to the door, she gets into a panic. I thought, I don't want to live in fear that people will discover I haven't got a real arm. And on another day, there was a woman who'd obviously been born without an arm. She had a little child without limbs, and working class, beautiful, proud, no prosthesis. That's what I want to be like, independent myself. I think it cost £1,000. This was 88, quite a lot of money. I carried it around in a bag, little black bag. I remember putting a bag down one day. Somebody else put a similar bag down next to mine. I imagined the person taking the wrong bag home and opening it and finding an arm inside. I'd promised 2 months. I went without it. 2 months were up, and I became me. This is who I am. And if people have a problem looking at me because I don't look like them, it's your problem. It's not my problem. If I'm confident in myself, then people are confident in me. It wasn't wasted money. I read about failed projects. It wasn't wasted in the sense, if I hadn't gone through that experience, I wouldn't have come to that understanding. I don't know where that arm is today. Maybe it's lying around. It can get something in a second-hand sale somewhere. But to me, it epitomizes a theme that I picked up in the literature. That sometimes if the people helping you are helping you in ways that are based on an assumption of what's right and needed, it doesn't work, it fails, but sometimes you have to go through that experience to discover that. In the event, a month or two passes, I'm now walking, I'm at home, someone comes to the door, and it's Schuller Marx, she's the director of the Institute of Commonwealth Studies. And she says, "Albie, what are you going to do? What would you..." I said, "I've been offered a fellowship at Warwick University and something else somewhere else." She said, "What would you like to do?" I said, "I'd like to work on preparing for a new constitution for South Africa." "Great," she said. "We have a bathroom upstairs in our little old building, which we can convert into an office. I'm sure we'll get funding from SIDA, Swedish International Development Agency, and Ford Foundation." And 2 months later, I was working there. That healed me. That healed me. The arm didn't heal me, it didn't help me, it hindered me. But being able to work on the very thing that had brought me into conflict with the old regime, to go ahead and achieve this theme of the Bill of Rights, the things we were fighting for and believing, that was healing for me. It was healing for the country. And that was a form of intervention that redefined the nature of needs. Instead of need being simply more medicine, more school books, more clothing, more food. Of course these things are important. More access to water. Need was seen in terms of repairing the soul, the mind, the imagination, establishing a kind of creativity. And Ford Foundation understood that, SIDA understood that, and it was a help to me, but it was also a help to our country, to Southern Africa in a way, to the world. Another theme that came through to me not long after that, and I might say I was a philanthropy, charity skeptic. Worse than that, I think I was hostile to the idea of people who had so much that they had things to give away, helping out the poor, the benighted, the marginalized. I felt we've got to change the structures of society. We've got to change the way things are done, not just help out individuals in need. Now I'm beginning to reconsider the nature of need is not simply distributing goods that are in short supply, scarce for certain people. But also the theme of reconceiving the nature of relationships. And the concept came to me, like so many surprises, out of the blue. It was at an art exhibition in Vienna. Wonderful, wonderful Mozambican artist, Malangatana, who died last year, is exhibiting. It's at a bank. And he's nervous. He feels, I can't speak about Picasso and this and that and the other. He's a great speaker. So I started off taking people past his paintings, and then Malangatana came in, and he spoke beautifully. And he told the story of, he never knew his father had gone to work from Mozambique on the mines in South Africa, never returned. His grandmother brought him up, and she used to tell him stories, and these stories now appear in his paintings. At age 16, he goes to work in then Lorenzo Marx. And one of the big discoveries at that time in his life is he's working for a family, white Portuguese family, in a double-storied house with 2 motor cars, very successful businessman in charge. His wife, elegant, beautiful, long blonde hair. She's got everything, and she's crying. He couldn't understand that a rich person who's got everything could cry. He's 16, and he gives comfort to the madam who's crying. And some of his first paintings show a woman with blonde, long blonde hair, and you sense her sadness. And he's now telling that story. And then he says, thank you to the government of Austria. You are helping us in Mozambique. We need water. You are providing us with cement and with pipes. And what do we in Africa have to offer? We can give you a song. And he used that phrase, you give what you've got to give. And to me, that was the magical phrase, because that equalizes everybody. And what do we give in Africa? Maybe we give a song, music, spirituality, Ubuntu, a sense of community. Now I'm beginning to reconfigure in my mind the nature of the relationship between the philanthropist and the beneficiary. It's not the wealthy, the empowered, sharing out some largesse to the deprived, the impoverished. Giving what you've got to give. You've got to give resources, access to resources, intelligence, knowledge, understanding, concepts, access to different things. That's what you've got to give. Maybe you've hard earned it yourself, maybe you've hard inherited it yourself. It doesn't really matter. You've got that. And the people involved in what's now a relationship give what they've got to give. Maybe something appropriate, dynamic, transcendent in the world in which they exist. Maybe solving problems that poison, that are toxic to the whole world. They're getting rid of that. And we saw it so profoundly. It was soft vengeance, as I've called it, with a vengeance in South Africa when we established our constitutional court. And we chose the site of the old Fort Prison, a site of misery, of pain, we say with a dubious pride, the only prison in the world where both Gandhi and Mandela were locked up. We South Africans have that. And that's where we put our constitutional court, deliberately. And who helped to transform what was now a derelict old fort prison area, Atlantic Philanthropy. They understood the importance. This wasn't simply a question of building a museum. It was a question of transforming negativity, hatred, disunity into positivity, into hope. And it had to be at that very site. That was the whole point of it. And so the placing of the court in that site and the rehabilitation of that site became a symbol, a beacon of what humanity is capable of achieving. And I might say, we've been, some of us, to Longkesh, to the Maze prison here in Northern Ireland, imagining how that site of pain, of hatred, of rancor, can now become a site of healing, of transformation, of hope. A discussion last year in the United States when we were hoping that Guantanamo Bay would be cleared of its occupants. It's taking a long time. But again, not to make it simply a museum, but to make it a site of transformation, acknowledging the pain, the conflicts, the tensions that have been in the history of that little portion of Cuban island, and making it something that's positive. And that's the kind of area where foundations have so much to offer, because they're not running for office. They're not worried about, maybe worried a little bit about headlines, but not too much about headlines. They're doing something because it's valid, it's important to do it. And again, the nature of the relationship is you give what you've got to give. We are judges on the court. We receive what we've got to receive, that is help. And the court building itself with beautiful artwork, a wonderful piece of architecture appropriate for its particular site. An artwork involving women's groups. They don't even know they're artists, they just make beautiful things, to our most famous artists all contributing. And people from sometimes fairly conservative foundations wondering, is it right to give money for art when people lack homes? And we tell them, people lack beauty, they lack hope. And poor people have a right to dignity, a right to feel that the buildings where their fundamental rights are being determined are open and friendly and receptive to themselves, that buildings that have always been frightening and terrifying to the majority of South Africans, belonging to somebody else, hostile in their very architecture, this building is smiling and embracing and welcoming because it represents the new South Africa. And it's a relationship of equals. We deliver justice in that particular area. We receive with enormous joy, not gratitude, joy, delight, support from the Mott Foundation, from Ford Foundation. I feel a little bit like the lady in the play. But I'm not seeking funds, that's okay. And a beautiful building emerges that somehow ennobles the very project that we're involved in and finds those connections that are not purely delivery, goods, material things, but the right to beauty, the right to justice, the right to freedom, the right to a sense of dignity that everybody has. I'm going to conclude. I was a little worried you were going to steal my main Northern Ireland story, not Dublin, Northern Ireland story, but you didn't. But it explains how that Bill of Rights came to be above the place where you were consulting. And it was some years back, and Avila was presiding over a truly extraordinary gathering. Former political prisoners. Some were loyalists, and they'd been fighting to kill, and they had been killing Republicans. And some were Republicans who'd been fighting to kill and killing loyalists. I couldn't tell the difference. They all spoke in the same Belfast way, mostly working class, the great burden of the struggle borne overwhelmingly by working class people. It was so emotional to me, an ex-political prisoner myself, to feel everybody in that room and to feel who had had the good sense, the intelligence, the courage, the conception of what foundations can do to make that event possible. And you've heard who it was. And I said, I've got 2 copies of the Bill of Rights, and one I'm giving to Avila, and the other one I couldn't cut it in half and give half to the Republicans and half to the Loyalists. I didn't know what to do. But I said, before I conclude, I want to just tell a little story. In 1989, while I'm still in exile, and I'm on the South African Constitutional Studies Center at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, somebody comes into my office and he's got a note. And he's speaking softly. And he said this note had been smuggled out from the IRA people locked up in Longkesh. And it was a note to me from someone who was, I couldn't remember his name, the editor of a journal that the Sinn Féin people were publishing for their prisoners. And the reason he wrote to me was they'd got a copy of The Soft Vengeance of a Freedom Fighter, my book. And they'd read in the book that I cried. And the question they were asking themselves was, can a freedom fighter cry? Is it right? And there were 5 on the editorial committee, and they split 3-2. I don't know how you can take a decision like that by majority vote, but 3 said you can cry, and 2 said a freedom fighter doesn't cry. And what was my response? And I'm telling these ex-political prisoners, I don't know who it was, and I felt so ashamed I didn't respond. I didn't respond because I was worried that somehow a connection would be made between the IRA and the ANC, and this might be used against the ANC in different ways, in the ways that people manipulate headlines and so on. And I felt ashamed. Here were prisoners asking me for my answer, and I wasn't giving it to them. And I see Avila, she's looking out, looking out, looking out. I finish. She said, Albie, you don't have to worry. I know who's going to get that second copy of the Bill of Rights. He's in this room today. I think I have the name right, Lawrence McKeown? McKeown, yeah. He happened to be in the room. And he came and we hugged and we embraced. It was a tender moment, it was a hard moment. And yet in that tiny little debate that they had inside, it's the beginning of a much bigger political debate that became part of the whole process of people in different continents liaising in dialogue with each other to find ways and means of achieving often just objectives, but through means that are different from the means that you've been using. You give what you've got to give. And we gave what we had to give, what we had to give. I told you that I was a skeptic of philanthropy. I think that was the moment when my ultimate skepticism, that last remaining doubt, disappeared. I just knew there are some things that are good and worthy and worthwhile, and they must be right. And if you somehow feel some conceptual problem, you've got to reconsider your thinking. When I came to England, psychological wreck after solitary confinement, tortured by sleep deprivation, I was in a very, very bad way. This was 1966. And I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. And it was wonderful just lying on Hampstead Heath, watching the kites flying and feeling they're not going to come for me tonight. But I didn't know what I was going to do. And I decided I want to get out of law. But I have to temporize. So I want to do a PhD. The strange thing, the South African legal system, on the one hand, very correct, using the language of law and justice, on the other hand, hanging 100 people a year, whipping thousands, forcing people out of their homes. How could that all be in one legal system? I didn't know how I would fund doing the doctorate. And Sir Robert Burley, who'd been headmaster of Eton, taught in Soweto, big friend, he said he knows somebody he thinks might be able to help me. And I received help. It was the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. And that was the first dent in my hostility towards philanthropy. I didn't feel that I was a down and out receiving some charitable support. I felt that friends, and you were friends in every sense, understood why I was washed up in England at that stage, understood the nature of the project, and they were going to enable me to do it. And that's the huge difference in a charitable type relationship, which I'm not against soup kitchens and old clothing and books, and of course that's useful. But there's something richer, more profound, deeper, something that's been the theme of this whole conference. And that's reaching inside, discovering the humanity in human beings, enable people to express that humanity. And it came in a timely way. The only price for me was taking a train up to York and being visually looked at so that I wasn't just a name on a piece of paper, but I was a human being out there. And that was part of my re-establishment, my recovery, some of my courage coming back in England. So today has really become the Stephen Pittum Day, and I now move over to the final phase, I think, which is going to be a conversation between you. I just want to thank you all. It's been tremendous for me to be with yourselves, hearing your laughter, feeling your emotion, and having the knowledge that there are so many people working in ways that are not just kindly, but that are good in quite a profound sense. Thank you all.